Good afternoon. My name is Brother Brian Vaccaro. I am a seminarian with the Redemptorists here in San Antonio at our parish, St. Gerard's. In my reflection today, I'd like to look at the idea of God making himself accessible to those that the world feels are unimportant or insignificant. In Matthew chapter 9, verses 32 to 38, we hear about a situation in Jesus' ministry where a mute demoniac is brought to Jesus, and Jesus heals the man. And then Jesus travels around to villages and towns, curing the sick, preaching in their synagogues, talking with the people, and bringing them the good news of the kingdom of God. And I'm sure that this experience of Jesus, this wonder worker who traveled with a crowd of followers, I'm sure that it was a wonderful experience for these people in these small towns and villages to be able to experience Jesus among them. Jesus took the time to care for them, to speak with them about their problems, their trials, their tribulations. He taught them, and when they brought their sick to him, he cured them. Jesus cared. These people were not too insignificant, and Jesus was not too busy to help them. God makes himself accessible to those that the world deems insignificant and unimportant. The gospel passage ends with a challenge. It talks about the harvest being abundant, but the laborers being few. And typically, we Catholics talk about this harvest and the laborers in the context of vocations. But I'd like to look at it today in the context of what I'm talking about. The harvest that is abundant are those in the world who the world deems unimportant and insignificant, and there are many. The laborers are those that God has called to serve as vessels, that God can work through to make himself accessible to those that the world sees as insignificant. And all of us are called to be those laborers. All of us are called to recognize those in the world who need to be touched by God. We need to be other-focused. We need to be those people that lend a helping hand, or lend a listening ear, or lend and give a word of encouragement to those that are down. This is how we make ourselves vessels, make ourselves tools that God uses to touch those that the world sees as insignificant. And who are these insignificant people? They are people like the poor and the homeless, the new student in school that has no one to talk to, the person in our neighborhood who seems to have no friends and no one to interact with, in the grocery store, the cashier or the person stocking the shelves, in the restaurant where we eat, the person who serves us. These are people that our society typically deems unimportant and insignificant. And yet we are called to recognize them and to allow God to work through us to make himself accessible to them. The difficulty is we don't always recognize when we're being called to do this. Many times we are too focused on our to-do list and our priorities to recognize what we are being called to do. This gospel issues a challenge to us. We must be other-focused so that God can be accessible to the insignificant. The question we need to ask ourselves is, will we be prepared when the situation arises to answer God's call?